Hey, George Haas here. I wanted to continue talking about Module 4 of Meditation Interventions for the Addiction Process. Module 4 is difficult interpersonal relationships as causal to relapse. Mostly what happens is that the pain that's caused by being engaged in intimate relationships, particularly when we're working from disadvantaged attachment strategies, cause the level of pain of living to be so high that the body-mind turns to addiction, turns to the use of substances and processes as a way of addressing so much pain. Um, we've been talking about the different attachment strategies that arise from different kinds of conditioning that children experience, and today I thought I would just review preoccupied attachment strategy in adults. This is called anxious ambivalent in children. A child that grows up to be an adult with this attachment strategy faces a inconsistency in care or inconsistency in the response from their caregivers, so that they truncate their ability to explore their own path for fear that in exploring they'll lose their connection to their caregiver. In a secure child's experience of learning to explore, they use their caregiver as their base, hopefully their secure base, from which to explore outward from. And then if they have the experience of danger or some kind of threat, they have a sense of being abandoned, they can rush back to their caregiver. And if their caregiver is reliably there, the circles of which they're comfortable to explore expand. First, they really won't leave the sightline of the caregiver. Then they'll be able to crawl out of sightline and back in and into the next room, and then in the interior of the place where they live, then eventually getting outside and exploring around where they live. All this while relying on the caregiver to take them back when they need to be taken back. In the experience of an ambivalent child, the caregiver never really provides that sense of security. One response, even if repeated faithfully, produces different reactions in the caregiver. Often the caregiver can't tolerate the abandonment experience that they have when the child leaves them, and so they inhibit the child from leaving. They inhibit the child from exploring. If we were to talk about it in a simple shorthand, to develop a secure attachment, as a child you need to receive the kind of care that when you want to be picked up, they pick you up, and when you want to be put down, they put you down. Often what we're experiencing in the child whose caregivers didn't do that, they often pick them up but then won't put them down. They inhibit unconsciously often the capacity for the child to explore. So you have an adult using a preoccupied attachment strategy that presents as helpless. One of the conundrums of this is so often you view them and they don't appear to be helpless, and yet they present as helpless. They come to you and ask you to help them solve a problem that they have, and you consider it and offer a solution to them, offer a recommendation to them, and they reject it, and then again represent the problem in a slightly changed way. And then you consider that, and you offer them some suggestions, and they reject that, and then again represent the same issue in a slightly modified way. And you may consider that again and offer some advice, or you may begin to feel helpless yourself in helping them. The experience of preoccupied people is that they present helplessness as a means of maintaining proximity And so if they were to accept the help, the need for the proximity with the attachment figure would be over. And so they put you in a kind of double bind of helplessness. They're constantly presenting as helpless. You're constantly attempting to help, but it's never actually helpful. So at one end of the spectrum of helpless, at the one end of perspective, at one end of this continuum is the helpless preoccupied, and at the other end is a fearful preoccupied person who you experience as angry and chaotic. Both of these views of preoccupied have the sense that I am incapable of getting my needs met, but all of you know how to do it. Everybody else knows how to do it, so that they have a sense of moral justification in demanding from other people that they help, that they rescue them. At the helpless end of the spectrum, there's a sense of focus on the empathetic experience of the other as the predominant emotional experience, but there's still some awareness of their own internal emotional experience. Then the fearful end, the focus on the empathetic experience is so complete that awareness of the individual's own emotional experience is lost. This creates a dilemma where the co-regulation that is so much a part of a normal and beneficial human exchange is unavailable to them. They don't have awareness of their own emotion, and their internal chaotic experience is such that they're unable to touch into that empathetic, unable to connect that empathetic experience of the other to their own emotion so that it can be regulating. So they're often in an experience of tantrum internally. The underlying motivation for somebody using a preoccupied strategy is closeness or proximity, and we're talking about actual physical proximity. This is the main driver in relationships for them. This strategy is also the most inauthentic strategy. The person who uses a preoccupied strategy is willing to completely abandon their own authenticity in order to achieve closeness or proximity to their attachment figure. So that when a preoccupied person is expressing themselves, they're not expressing what's authentic to them, but they're expressing what they think will maintain proximity to the caregiver that they're looking for. Underneath this inauthenticity is a fear of abandonment. One of the things that happens to people who use a preoccupied strategy is that because they have been willing to abandon or have been put in a situation where they have to abandon their own exploration, their own path, and they turn to somebody else for proximity, for that sense of safety, there is a constant state of deprivation which they expect the attachment figure to compensate for. They're willing to abandon themselves in order to maintain proximity, and then want that deprivation that comes from not being able to explore from the attachment figure. There's often an anger that arises in the process of inauthenticity. I like to describe it in this way. You respond to the conditions of the present moment. You have a sense of authenticity or authentic response to the present moment, but if you feel that the expression of that authentic experience of the present moment might cause the attachment figure to abandon you, you have a spike of abandonment terror. And then the inauthentic thing arises in the mind that is really meant to relieve the abandonment terror. You spin your reaction to the present moment in a way that you think that the other person won't leave you. Often we get into a state of delusion about this where we think that that's preserving the relationship, when actually what it's doing is reducing the abandonment terror. If you know what your authentic response is and then you see the arising of the inauthentic response because of a spike in abandonment terror, and you push into the inauthentic expression, it does relieve the abandonment terror, so there's immediate benefit there. But you end up in a place of anger because you haven't been able to authentically express yourself. In some way, you even blame the other person for not being able to be authentic. And you don't ask authentically for what you need, so even if they do respond to the request that you make and meet the need expressed, it's often not what you really want, and so you're in this state of deprivation which leads to anger. If you were able to push authentically into the expression of your experience, that intensifies the abandonment terror, and if you can hold that experience, that often dissolves and you're hit with a wave of terrible sadness, which is the experience of all of the other times that you've abandoned yourself to inauthenticity. If you can ride out that terrible sadness, you come into a place of security in relationship. Helpless, preoccupied people tend to connect through helplessness, so unable to really explore their own path, they turn their focus onto the path of the attachment figure. This creates a fearfulness around authenticity, around autonomy, around self-sufficiency. In some sense, the belief is that if you're autonomous and self-sufficient, that will render yourself unlovable. And rather than be unlovable, you abandon actually exploring your own path. Preoccupied people have a tendency to trade sex for closeness, but the expression of sexuality is not authentic. The expression for sexual engagement is made, but the purpose of it is not sexual satisfaction, but proximity or closeness to the attachment figure. On the fearful end of the preoccupied attachment strategy, the internal experience is one of chaos, of anger. Torn between their terror for dependency and their bottomless need, they may appear desperate for help, but tyrannized by the conviction that their needs will drive help away. So preoccupied people at the fearful end experience life as an ongoing crisis. I said this a few minutes ago, but fearfully preoccupied people have a sense of their own feeling state, but the voice is faint. The fearful preoccupied people lose touch with their own emotional experience and are focused entirely on the attachment figure's emotional experience. The conditioning of early childhood creates a different way in which the brain forms. So we often can personalize our experience of someone else and think that their behavior is entirely volitional and that they have control over it. But in the preoccupied brain, the links between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are not in sync, really. The sympathetic nervous system is the activating force in the mind, and the parasympathetic system is the dampening down. So the amygdala, which goes off in fight, flight, freeze, faint, fornicate as a reaction to the world, is easily activated. The hippocampus is then supposed to evaluate whether the stress is real or not, and if it's not, dampen down the arousal of the amygdala. So hippocampus being the parasympathetic or the dampening quality. So you have the arousal of the sensing of danger, and then the hippocampus making an evaluation whether it's accurate on and dampening down those situations where the threat is not real. They're linked by the orbital frontal cortex, and so the activation of the amygdala is linked through the orbital frontal cortex to the hippocampus, which is linked through the corpus callosum to dampening down, and in dampen down the amygdala. And in in preoccupied adults, these linkages aren't in sync well enough, so that what you notice in somebody who uses a preoccupied strategy is that they're very easily aroused and they're very slow to settle. And it's important to understand that this is not volitional, this is the nature of the brain of somebody who uses that attachment strategy. If you think about the conundrum of the human condition, we are born with prematurely developed brains, in a sense. The brain stem is intact. This is the Dan Siegel model. The brain stem is intact. The midbrain, or the emotional brain, the mammalian brain, is partially formed, and the frontal cortexes that wrap around that are hardly formed at all. So our experience as humans is that the actual physical structure of the brain grows in response to the environment in which we're in, grows in response to the care we receive. So we actually have a brain that's conditioned, that the actual physical structure of the brain develops in response to the conditioning that we receive, so that people who are using a preoccupied strategy do not have a choice about this. This is the nature of their brain. One of the reasons that I like to work with meditation in this is that in practicing meditation, we can realign the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system so that they operate more in sync. Anyway, I think that that's enough of a description of this. As we continue next time, I'll talk about fearful avoidant attachment strategy and then unresolved attachment strategy. And then we'll begin to talk about how these various attachment strategies work in concert with other attachment strategies to create a sense of how relationships are formed. If we review, in a secure person, the view is that I'm capable of getting my needs met, and the world is filled with people who are interested in meeting my needs, capable of meeting my needs. That's one way of moving through the world. The dismissing person has a inflated, false sense of self which says, I am terrific and I am great at getting my needs met. The problem is that all of you aren't up to meeting my needs. In the secure person, the view creates a sense of mutuality in the relationship, that makes sense. In the dismissing person, it creates a moral justification to take what you need. This is contrasting to the experience of the avoidant child whose needs are so consistently rejected that they give up asking for their needs they give up asking for their needs to be met, which isn't to say they give up getting their needs met, they just give up asking for it, and then they feel a sense of moral justification to take what they want. In the preoccupied adult, the view is that I'm not capable of getting my needs met, but all of the rest of you have figured it out, and it develops in them a sense of moral justification for you to take care of them. I don't know how to take care of myself, but you do, so therefore you're morally obligated to meet my needs. Each of these systems, the dismissing system and the preoccupied system, could be called a single person psychology system, so you'll notice in each of those that the person appears to be quite self-centered. Anyway, thanks, and I will be back in 2 weeks. I'm on retreat for the next 2.